They seemed like a match made in heaven. Andrea and Robert Chen had the kind of love story that made their friends smile and nod knowingly, the type where everything just clicked into place. Both of them worked at the same hospital, though in different departments. She was a dedicated nurse in the pediatric ward, while he managed the hospital's pharmacy department. That's where they first bumped into each other, quite literally, when Andrea was rushing to get some urgent medication for one of her young patients. "Oh my goodness, I'm so sorry," she had exclaimed, helping him pick up the scattered papers. Their eyes met, and they both laughed at the cliché movie moment they were living. From that day on, they kept finding excuses to run into each other, though less dramatically. Their romance blossomed naturally, like a flower opening its petals in spring. Within a year, they were married in a beautiful garden ceremony, surrounded by their closest friends and family. Everyone commented on how perfect they looked together, both fair-skinned with warm smiles that could light up any room. Robert's mother especially adored Andrea, always telling anyone who would listen how blessed she was to have such a wonderful daughter-in-law. Life settled into a comfortable rhythm for the newlyweds. They bought a cozy house in a friendly neighborhood, complete with a small backyard where Andrea dreamed of watching their future children play. Both of them worked hard at their careers, but they always made time for each other. Date nights were sacred. Every Friday, without fail, they would try a new restaurant or cook together at home. But something was missing. After 2 years of marriage, their home still felt a little too quiet, a little too empty. They started trying for a baby, excited about the prospect of becoming parents. Months passed, then a year, then 2. Each negative pregnancy test felt like a small heartbreak. They visited fertility specialists, tried different treatments, and kept hoping that next month would be their month. "Maybe we should take a break from trying," Robert suggested one evening, seeing how the stress was affecting his wife. "Let's just focus on us for a while." Andrea agreed, though her heart ached every time she saw a mother with a baby at the hospital. And then, just when they had started to accept that maybe parenthood wasn't in their cards, it happened. Andrea missed her period. She waited a few days before taking the test, not wanting to get her hopes up. When those 2 pink lines appeared, she couldn't believe her eyes. She took 3 more tests just to be sure. The way she told Robert was priceless. She left the positive pregnancy test in a small gift box on his bedside table. When he opened it that evening, his hands started shaking. Are we? He couldn't even finish the sentence. Andrea nodded, tears of joy streaming down her face. They held each other for what felt like hours, dreaming about their future as parents. The next few weeks were a whirlwind of excitement. Their first ultrasound revealed an even bigger surprise: twins. Robert nearly fainted in the doctor's office when they heard 2 distinct heartbeats. They started preparing the nursery right away, painting the walls a gentle yellow. Every evening, Robert would talk to Andrea's growing belly, telling stories and singing silly songs to their unborn babies. Their families were overjoyed at the news. Robert's mother started knitting baby clothes, and Andrea's parents began planning how often they would visit to help with the twins. At work, their colleagues threw them a wonderful baby shower, filling their home with everything they would need for the babies. The pregnancy progressed smoothly, with Andrea glowing more each day. Robert attended every single doctor's appointment, holding her hand during checkups and proudly displaying ultrasound photos on his phone. He downloaded multiple pregnancy apps and would read out daily updates about how big their babies were. This week, they're the size of avocados. Life was perfect, or so it seemed. Neither of them could have predicted how their world would turn upside down in just a few months. But for now, they were living in that beautiful bubble of expectant parenthood, counting down the days until they would meet their little ones. The big day finally arrived 3 weeks earlier than expected. Andrea woke up at 2 a.m. with sharp contractions. She gently shook Robert awake, her voice trembling with a mix of excitement and fear. "Honey, I think it's time." Within minutes, Robert had transformed into a nervous wreck, running around the house with a pre-packed hospital bag, almost forgetting to put on his shoes. The drive to the hospital was tense but filled with anticipation. Between contractions, Andrea kept squeezing Robert's hand, both of them sharing nervous smiles. The hospital corridors felt different this time. Instead of walking them as staff members, they were here as expectant parents. Their usual doctor was off duty, so Dr. Williams, a kind-faced woman with graying hair, took charge. The labor room was filled with nurses, all prepared for the twin delivery. Robert stood by Andrea's side, wiping her forehead and whispering words of encouragement as the contractions intensified. "You're doing amazing, sweetheart," he kept saying, his voice steady despite his racing heart. Hours passed, and finally the moment arrived. The first baby was coming. Andrea pushed with all her might, her face red with effort. The room fell silent except for her determined breathing and the encouraging voices of the medical team. Then came the cry, strong and healthy. But something changed in the room. The medical staff exchanged quick, concerned glances. Dr. Williams maintained her professional composure, but there was an unmistakable tension in the air. Robert, still holding Andrea's hand, leaned forward to see their firstborn. His hand went limp in Andrea's grip. The baby, though perfectly healthy and crying vigorously, had dark brown skin. Before anyone could process this, Andrea was already in the midst of delivering their second child. Minutes later, another cry filled the room, their second baby, also with beautiful dark brown skin. The silence that followed was deafening. Robert's face had turned pale, his eyes fixed on the twins as the nurses cleaned them up. Andrea, exhausted from the delivery, couldn't understand why everyone had gone so quiet. When the nurses brought the babies to her, she gasped, her eyes wide with confusion. There must be some mistake," Robert stammered, his voice barely a whisper. He took a step back from the bed, then another. Andrea looked up at him, her eyes filling with tears. "Robert, I don't understand. I swear, I've never." But Robert wasn't listening anymore. His world had narrowed to a tunnel, and all he could see were the two dark-skinned babies being cradled by his fair-skinned wife. Without a word, he turned and walked out of the delivery room. Andrea called after him, her voice breaking with desperation, but he kept walking. The nurses exchanged uncomfortable looks, trying to focus on caring for Andrea and the newborns. Dr. Williams attempted to maintain a sense of normalcy, checking the baby's vitals and assuring Andrea that they were perfectly healthy. But nothing felt normal anymore. Hours passed, and Robert didn't return. Andrea's calls went straight to voicemail. Her parents arrived at the hospital, shocked by both the appearance of their grandchildren and Robert's disappearance. They tried to comfort their daughter, who lay in her hospital bed, tears streaming down her face as she held her beautiful twins. "I don't understand," she kept repeating, looking at her babies through tear-filled eyes. "They're his. They have to be his. I've never been with anyone else." But the evidence seemed to speak for itself, and Robert's absence spoke even louder. The next day, a nurse found a note at the reception desk. Robert had scribbled a few lines saying he needed time to think and would be staying at his brother's house. He also mentioned that he would be contacting a lawyer. The nurse debated whether to give the note to Andrea, who was still recovering and trying to bond with her babies despite her emotional turmoil. That evening, as Andrea sat in her hospital room, cradling her newborns and watching the sunset, she realized her life would never be the same. These precious babies, so innocent and unaware of the storm their arrival had caused, depended on her now. Whatever explanation there might be for their appearance, whatever the future held, she knew one thing for certain: she would protect and love them with everything she had. Coming home from the hospital was nothing like Andrea had imagined. Instead of the joyful homecoming with Robert carrying the car seat and showing off their babies to the neighbors, her father helped her inside while her mother carried the twins. The nursery, painted with such love and hope just weeks ago, now felt like a monument to broken dreams. The first few days were a blur of feeding schedules, diaper changes, and tears, both from the babies and Andrea. Her mother moved in temporarily to help, watching with a heavy heart as her daughter struggled to balance caring for newborn twins while dealing with the collapse of her marriage. Robert's lawyer contacted her within a week. The message was clear. He wanted a divorce and a DNA test. The words on the legal document blurred as Andrea read them, her hands shaking. How could the man who had lovingly talked to her belly every night now be demanding proof that these were his children? News spread quickly in the neighborhood. Andrea noticed the change immediately. The same neighbors who had dropped off casseroles during her pregnancy now hurried past her house, avoiding eye contact. She overheard whispers at the local grocery store, saw the pointing fingers when she took the twins for walks in their double stroller. "I just don't understand," she confided in her best friend over the phone one night, after finally getting the babies to sleep. "These are his children. I've never been with anyone else. How can people think I would do that?" Her friend listened sympathetically, but had no answers to offer. The hospital where they both worked became an uncomfortable space. Andrea's maternity leave wasn't over yet, but Robert had already transferred to a different branch, unable to face the gossip and stares. His colleagues, once friendly faces in the hallways, now treated her like she carried some contagious disease of betrayal. But amid all this chaos and hurt, Andrea found strength in her twins. She named them Daniel and Sophia, choosing names that belonged to her grandparents. Every morning, looking into their innocent faces, she felt a fierce determination growing inside her. These babies needed her, and she wouldn't let anyone's judgment stop her from being the best mother she could be. Her parents helped her find a good lawyer, one who specialized in family law. "We'll fight this," the lawyer assured her. "If you're certain these are his children, we'll prove it." But even she seemed skeptical when looking at the twins' dark skin tone compared to their mother's fair complexion. The DNA test was scheduled for when the twins were 6 weeks old. The procedure itself was simple. Just a quick cheek swab for each baby and a blood test for Andrea. But emotionally, it felt like she was being stabbed in the heart. Having to prove her faithfulness through science felt degrading, yet she knew it was necessary. Robert didn't show up for the DNA test. He sent his lawyer instead, maintaining his distance. Andrea hadn't seen him since he walked out of the delivery room. His family, who had once treated her like a daughter, now refused to answer her calls. His mother, who had been so excited about becoming a grandmother, returned all the baby clothes she had knitted, leaving them in a box on Andrea's porch without even knocking. Life fell into a new routine, different from anything Andrea had planned. She learned to function on minimal sleep, to comfort 2 crying babies at once, to smile through the pain when well-meaning people asked about her situation. Her mother taught her tricks for managing twins. How to feed them both at the same time, how to get them on the same sleep schedule, how to find moments for herself between their needs. The hardest part was the loneliness. Nights were especially difficult, when the house was quiet except for the soft breathing of her babies. She would look at their peaceful sleeping faces and wonder how something so beautiful could cause so much pain. Sometimes she caught herself reaching for her phone to share a cute photo with Robert, only to remember that he wouldn't want to see it. But day by day, Andrea grew stronger. She started keeping a journal, writing letters to her twins that she hoped would someday help them understand this complicated beginning to their story. "Your father was a good man," she wrote one night. "And somehow, someday, we'll understand why you came to us looking so different. But know this, you are loved, you are wanted, and you are perfect exactly as you are." Time has a way of healing wounds, or at least making them easier to bear. As the months turned into years, Daniel and Sophia grew into happy, energetic children. By age 9, they had their own distinct personalities. Daniel was quiet and thoughtful, always carrying a book, while Sophia was a bundle of energy who loved to dance and couldn't sit still during dinner. Life as a single mother wasn't easy, but Andrea had found her rhythm. She returned to work at a different hospital, where nobody knew her story. Her coworkers there just saw her as the dedicated nurse who had pictures of two beautiful dark-skinned children on her desk. When anyone asked, she simply said she was a single mom, and most people were polite enough not to pry further. The twins, though, had questions. They were smart kids, and as they grew older, they noticed the differences between themselves and their mother. It started with innocent observations. One day, while coloring family portraits in first grade, Sophia looked up from her drawing and asked, "Mommy, why don't you look like us?" These moments always caught Andrea off guard, no matter how much she prepared for them. She would take a deep breath and explain that families come in all shapes, sizes, and colors. She never lied to them about having a father, but she kept the explanations age-appropriate. "Your father and I separated when you were babies," she would say, "but that doesn't change how much you're loved." School brought its own challenges. At parent-teacher conferences, Andrea would sometimes catch teachers doing a double take when she introduced herself as Daniel and Sophia's mother. The twins faced questions too, mostly from curious classmates who didn't understand how they could be her children. But they handled it with remarkable grace, usually shrugging it off with, "That's just how we are." Their grandmother helped whenever she could, watching the twins after school while Andrea worked. She taught them to bake cookies, helped with homework, and provided the extra love they needed. But sometimes, when she thought no one was looking, she would stare at her grandchildren with a mixture of love and lingering confusion, still unable to understand the mystery of their appearance. The neighborhood had changed too, or maybe people had just gotten used to them. The whispers had died down, replaced by friendly waves and casual conversations. The twins made friends easily, getting invited to birthday parties and playdates. Some of the same neighbors who had once gossiped now brought over hand-me-downs from their own children. Daniel developed a deep interest in science, something that both delighted and sometimes pained Andrea, reminding her of Robert's analytical mind. He would spend hours watching educational videos about genetics and heredity, though he never directly connected these interests to his own story. Sophia, on the other hand, found her passion in art, filling sketchbooks with drawings of diverse families in all colors and combinations. One evening, while helping Daniel with his science homework, he suddenly asked, "Mom, do you have any pictures of Dad?" Andrea had kept a few photos, tucked away in a box in her closet. She hesitated but decided they were old enough now. She brought out the wedding album, and for the first time in years, looked at Robert's smiling face. The twins sat on either side of her on the couch, studying the photos intently. "He has your nose, Daniel," Andrea said softly, pointing to Robert's profile. Sophia traced her finger over the image, then looked at her own reflection in the window. The questions in her eyes were clear, but she didn't voice them. That night, after tucking them in, Andrea found Daniel had left his science textbook open to a chapter about genetic inheritance. Her heart ached, knowing that her bright, curious son was trying to make sense of his own story. She gently closed the book and kissed his forehead, whispering, "Sometimes life's mysteries take time to solve." Outside his room, she leaned against the wall, holding back tears. The twins were growing up so fast, and soon they would want more answers than she could give. She pulled out her phone and looked at the latest DNA test results again, still waiting to be sent to Robert's lawyer. The truth was in there somewhere, she knew it. She just hadn't expected it would take so long to reveal itself. Everything changed the summer before the twins turned 10. It started with what seemed like just a bad cold for Sophia. She was more tired than usual, and small bruises appeared on her arms for no apparent reason. Andrea, with her nursing experience, felt something wasn't right. Mother's intuition, combined with medical knowledge, sent alarm bells ringing. The first doctor they visited tried to reassure them it was just a virus, but Andrea pushed for blood tests. When the results came back, the numbers weren't normal. They were referred to a specialist, and suddenly their peaceful life turned into a whirlwind of hospital visits and medical terms. "We need to run more comprehensive genetic testing," the specialist explained, studying Sophia's file. "Some rare blood conditions can be inherited, and understanding the genetic background could be crucial for treatment." Andrea's heart skipped a beat. They would need both parents' medical history for this. Daniel, always protective of his twin sister, sat in the hospital waiting room during every appointment, his science books forgotten in his backpack as he held his sister's hand. He didn't fully understand the medical discussions, but he knew something important was happening. "Will this help us know why we look different?" he whispered to Sophia one day. She squeezed his hand in response. The genetic testing was extensive, involving both twins since they were identical. Blood samples were taken, and detailed family medical histories were recorded. Andrea provided all the information she could about her side of the family, but Robert's medical history remained a blank space on the forms. Then came the day that would change everything. The genetic specialist, Dr. Thompson, called Andrea in for a private meeting. She sat in his office, clutching her purse, expecting news about Sophia's condition. Instead, what he said made her world spin. "Mrs. Chen," he began, his voice careful but excited, "while investigating Sophia's blood condition, we've discovered something remarkable. Have you ever heard of genetic atavism?" Andrea shook her head, her hands trembling slightly. The doctor pulled up some diagrams on his computer screen. He explained in simple terms how sometimes genes that have been dormant for generations can suddenly become active. "Think of it like old family recipes," he said, seeing her confused expression. "Just because your grandmother's cookbook was lost for years doesn't mean the recipes weren't there. Sometimes they can be rediscovered." As he continued explaining, Andrea's eyes filled with tears. The genetic tests had revealed something extraordinary. The twins' dark skin tone wasn't from recent ancestry, but from genes that had been carried silently through generations, suddenly expressing themselves in her children. "This is actually more common than people think," Dr. Thompson explained, "though rarely so dramatic. But here's what's most important." He paused, making sure he had her full attention. "The genetic markers clearly show that the father of your twins is exactly who you said it was. The man listed on their birth certificates, your ex-husband, is undoubtedly their biological father." Andrea covered her face with her hands, years of pain and doubt pouring out in quiet sobs. The doctor gently placed a box of tissues in front of her. "We'd like to publish these findings in a medical journal," he said softly. "With your permission, of course. This could help other families who might face similar situations." When she finally composed herself, Andrea had one pressing question. "How do I explain this to my children?" The doctor smiled kindly. "Children often understand these things better than adults. They accept that nature can be full of surprises." Walking out of the office, Andrea felt lighter than she had in years. She found the twins in the waiting room, Sophia drawing pictures while Daniel read a book. Looking at them now, she saw not a genetic mystery, but a miracle, one that science had finally helped explain. That evening, as they sat at their favorite pizza place, a tradition after hospital visits, Andrea watched her children laughing together. Soon, she would have to figure out how to tell Robert, how to share this revelation that changed everything. But for now, she simply enjoyed the moment, knowing that finally, she had the answer she'd been waiting for all these years. News travels fast in the medical community. Within weeks of Dr. Thompson publishing his findings, the story caught the attention of several major medical journals. While names and personal details were kept private, the genetic discovery was making waves. Articles started appearing online, discussing this rare case of genetic expression. Robert, now living in a different state and working as a pharmacy director, first saw the article during his lunch break. A colleague had shared it in their department's group chat, fascinated by the scientific implications. At first, he skimmed it casually, but then certain details made his heart stop: the location, the timing, the description of twins born to fair-skinned parents. His hands shaking, he read the article 3 more times. The scientific evidence was clear and undeniable. The genes responsible for the twins' appearance had been traced back through multiple generations, proving that 2 fair-skinned parents could, indeed, have children with dark skin. The DNA analysis was conclusive. That evening, Robert sat alone in his apartment, staring at old photos on his phone that he'd never had the courage to delete. Pictures of Andrea during her pregnancy, both of them smiling, full of hope. He thought about all the years of anger, the accusations, the cold legal letters, and the weight of his mistake began crushing him. "I need a drink," he told himself, reaching for his car keys. But instead of heading to a bar, he found himself driving to his brother's house. The same brother who had taken him in 10 years ago when he'd walked out of that hospital room. "I messed up," Robert said as soon as his brother opened the door. "I messed up so badly." His brother, who had stood by him all these years, listened as Robert poured out his heart, showing him the medical article on his phone. "What are you going to do about it?" his brother finally asked. The question hung in the air like a heavy cloud. Robert had a new life now, a new job, a new wife, though no children. He built walls around his past, trying to forget. But those walls were crumbling. The next morning, Robert called in sick to work for the first time in 5 years. He spent hours drafting and deleting emails to Andrea. How do you apologize for 10 years of absence? How do you ask forgiveness for doubting someone's love and honesty? Every attempt felt inadequate. Finally, he did the only thing he could think of. He called their old family lawyer, the same lawyer who had handled their divorce papers a decade ago. "I need to make this right," he said, his voice cracking. "I need to know if there's a way." The lawyer, who had seen many family dramas unfold over the years, was silent for a moment. "There's always a way," she finally said, "but it won't be easy. Are you ready for what this might mean?" Robert thought about the twins, his children, who were now 10 years old. Children he'd never known, whose first steps he'd missed, whose voices he'd never heard. The weight of those lost years felt like stones in his pockets, pulling him down. That afternoon, he wrote 2 letters. The first was to his current wife, explaining everything. He owed her the truth before he turned his life upside down again. The second was to Andrea, sent through the lawyer. It was simple, humble, and direct. "I saw the medical journal article. I know the truth now. I was wrong, so terribly wrong. I know I don't deserve forgiveness, but I need to try to make things right. Not for me, but for them. For our children. If you're willing to talk, I'm ready to listen. I'll understand if the answer is no." He added his phone number and email address, then sat back, feeling both lighter and heavier at the same time. The ball was in Andrea's court now. After 10 years of silence, all he could do was wait and hope she would read his letter. That night, Robert couldn't sleep. He kept thinking about what his children might look like now, what their voices sounded like, what they liked to do. He thought about all the birthdays he missed, all the school plays and parent-teacher conferences he should have attended. The regret was overwhelming, but for the first time in 10 years, it was mixed with something else. Hope. Andrea stared at the letter in her hands, reading it for the 10th time that evening. The twins were at their grandmother's house, giving her space to process this unexpected development. Her first instinct had been to tear up the letter, to protect herself and her children from more pain. But something stopped her. She pulled out her phone and called her best friend. "He wants to meet them," she said, her voice barely a whisper. After all these years. Her friend listened patiently as Andrea read the letter aloud, noting how Robert's words seemed genuinely remorseful. "What are you going to tell the kids?" her friend asked. That was the million-dollar question. Daniel and Sophia had just started asking more questions about their father. Last week, Daniel had done a family tree project for school, and the blank spaces had bothered him more than usual. The next day, Andrea scheduled an appointment with a family therapist who specialized in reunification cases. "You don't have to make this decision alone," the therapist explained. "And whatever you decide, it needs to be what's best for the twins." Over the next few weeks, Andrea met with the therapist regularly. They discussed various scenarios, potential outcomes, and most importantly, how to approach this with the children. "They're old enough to have a say in this," the therapist advised. "But they need to understand what's happening." One quiet Sunday afternoon, Andrea sat the twins down in their living room. She'd prepared their favorite snacks, chocolate chip cookies and apple slices. "Remember how we looked at those old photos a while ago?" she began, trying to keep her voice steady. "And you asked about your dad?" Daniel and Sophia nodded, exchanging quick glances. They could sense something important was coming. "Well," Andrea continued, "your father has learned about the medical tests we did. He knows now that he was wrong about something very important, and he'd like to meet you." The twins' reactions were dramatically different. Sophia jumped up, full of questions and excitement, while Daniel remained silent, gripping his sister's hand tightly. "Does he want to be our dad now?" Sophia asked, her eyes wide. "Why did he wait so long?" Andrea took a deep breath. "He made a mistake," she explained carefully. "A big one. He didn't understand something about genetics, about why you both look different from us. But now he knows the truth, and he's very sorry. He'd like a chance to know you, but only if you want to." "Do we have to?" Daniel's voice was barely audible. It was the first thing he'd said since she started talking. Andrea moved to sit between them, pulling them close. "No, sweetheart. You don't have to do anything you don't want to do. This is your choice." Over dinner, they talked more. The twins had countless questions. What was he like? Where did he live? Did he have other children? Andrea answered as honestly as she could, showing them recent photos Robert had sent through the lawyer. That night, as Andrea tucked them in, Sophia asked, "Can we think about it?" Daniel nodded in agreement. "Of course," Andrea replied, kissing their foreheads. "Take all the time you need." The next few days were filled with quiet conversations. The twins processed the news in their own ways. Daniel buried himself in his books, occasionally asking very specific questions about genetics and family law. Sophia drew picture after picture, some of happy families, others of stormy skies. After a week of thinking and talking, they came to Andrea with their decision. "We want to meet him," Sophia announced, speaking for both of them as usual. "But," Daniel added softly, "can you stay with us when we do?" Andrea hugged them tightly, fighting back tears. "Of course I'll stay with you. We'll do this together, like we do everything else." She sent a message to the lawyer that evening, agreeing to a meeting, but with conditions. It would be on their terms, in a neutral place, with their family therapist present. As she watched the twins getting ready for bed that night, Andrea realized that regardless of how the meeting went, her children had shown incredible strength and maturity. They were willing to open their hearts to the possibility of having their father in their lives, even after all these years. Their courage made her proud, and a little less afraid of what was to come. The day of the meeting arrived with a mix of sunshine and clouds. Fitting weather for such an emotional moment. They'd chosen a quiet room at the Family Counseling Center, a neutral space filled with comfortable couches and calm, blue walls. Andrea arrived early with the twins, both dressed in their favorite outfits. Sophia wore her lucky purple dress, while Daniel had chosen his most grown-up-looking sweater. "Remember," the therapist said gently, "you can take a break whenever you need one. Just give me the signal we practiced." The twins nodded, sitting close together on the couch. Andrea sat nearby, trying to appear calmer than she felt. When Robert walked in, time seemed to stand still. 10 years had changed him. His hair had touches of gray now, and he'd gained a little weight. He stopped in the doorway, his eyes moving from Andrea to the twins, then back again. The silence in the room was heavy with 10 years of unspoken words. Sophia, always the braver one, broke the silence. "You look older than in the pictures," she said matter-of-factly. A surprised laugh escaped Robert's throat, breaking some of the tension. "Yes, I suppose I do," he replied, his voice shaking slightly. Daniel studied Robert intensely, taking in every detail. "Mom says I have your nose," he said quietly. Robert nodded, fighting back tears. "You do. And Sophia has my mother's smile." He remained standing, as if unsure whether he was allowed to sit down. The therapist gestured to a chair, and Robert sat, his hands clasped tightly in his lap. I brought something for you both," he said, reaching into a bag. He pulled out 2 photo albums. "These are pictures of me when I was your age, and some of your grandparents, my parents, when they were young." The twins moved closer, curiosity overtaking their nervousness. As they flipped through the pages, Robert pointed out different relatives. "See this man here? That's your great-grandfather. He loved science too, Daniel. And Sophia, your grandmother, my mom, she used to dance, just like you." Andrea watched silently as Robert shared these pieces of family history. She noticed how careful he was not to make any promises or push too hard. He answered the twins' questions honestly, including the difficult ones. "Why didn't you believe Mom?" Daniel asked suddenly, looking up from a photo. The room grew quiet again. Robert took a deep breath. "I made a terrible mistake," he said, his voice cracking. "I didn't understand something very important about genetics, and instead of trusting your mother, who has always been honest and good, I let my confusion and fear make me walk away. It's the biggest regret of my life." Sophia reached over and patted his hand, a gesture so innocent and forgiving that it brought tears to everyone's eyes. "Well, now you know better," she said simply. Daniel nodded in agreement, though he remained more reserved. As the meeting continued, they shared stories about school, hobbies, and favorite foods. The twins discovered they had inherited more than just physical features from Robert. Daniel's love of puzzles and Sophia's quick wit seemed to run in the family too. When the therapist signaled that their time was almost up, Robert looked at his children with hope in his eyes. "I know I can't make up for the past 10 years," he said carefully. "But if you're willing, I'd like to be part of your lives now. Whatever that looks like, whatever you're comfortable with." The twins looked at each other, then at their mother. Andrea nodded encouragingly, letting them know this was their decision to make. "Can we start with emails?" Daniel suggested. "And maybe video calls sometimes." "We have a dance recital next month," Sophia added. "You could come to that, if you want." Robert smiled through his tears. "I'd like that very much," he said softly. As they prepared to leave, Robert handed Andrea an envelope. "It's not much," he said, "but it's college funds I've been saving for them since I saw the article. I know it doesn't make up for anything, but—" Andrea took the envelope without opening it. "Thank you," she said simply. It wasn't forgiveness exactly, but it was a start. As they walked to their cars, the twins waved goodbye to their father, and for the first time in 10 years, the future held new possibilities for their family, whatever shape it might take. 6 months passed, and slowly but surely, a new kind of normal began to take shape. Robert kept every promise he made that first day. He never missed a video call, responded to every email, and showed up for every event the twins invited him to. He sat proudly in the audience at Sophia's dance recital, recording every moment, and beamed with pride when Daniel won first place in the science fair. The relationship grew carefully, like a delicate plant that needed just the right amount of attention. Robert didn't try to rush things or force his way back into their lives. Instead, he let the twins set the pace. Sometimes, they wanted to talk for hours about everything and nothing. Other times, a quick text message was enough. One sunny Saturday, during a family picnic in the park, something that had become a monthly tradition, Sophia was showing Robert her latest dance routine while Daniel sat nearby, reading a book about genetics. Andrea watched from her spot under a tree, amazed at how life had changed. "Mom," Daniel called out, looking up from his book. "Did you know that the genetic thing that happened to us, it helped other families too?" He was right. Dr. Thompson's publication about their case had sparked new research into genetic expression. Several other families had come forward with similar stories, finding answers to their own genetic mysteries. Robert, who had moved back to town and taken a job at a local pharmacy, was making up for lost time in his own way. He'd started a support group for parents dealing with unexpected genetic situations, sharing his story as a cautionary tale about jumping to conclusions. "I was so sure I knew how genetics worked," he would tell other parents. "But nature has so many surprises. The biggest mistake I made wasn't being confused. It was letting that confusion destroy my trust in someone I loved." The twins' 11th birthday party was a testament to how far they'd all come. Both sets of grandparents were there, awkward at first, but warming up as they watched their grandchildren open presents. Robert's mother had even started knitting again, presenting the twins with matching sweaters that actually fit this time. During the party, Andrea found herself standing next to Robert as they watched Sophia teach her cousins some dance moves while Daniel explained his latest science project to anyone who would listen. "They're amazing kids," Robert said softly. "You did an incredible job raising them." "They are amazing," Andrea agreed. "And now they have both of us." It wasn't perfect. There were still moments of awkwardness, old hurts that needed healing, and new challenges to face. But they were facing them together as a family of their own unique kind. The story of their family began appearing in medical textbooks, not just as a case study of genetic atavism, but as a reminder to doctors about the complexity of human genetics and the importance of not making assumptions. Their experience had changed how some doctors approached similar cases, preventing other families from going through what they had. One evening, as Andrea was helping the twins with their homework, Sophia asked a question that showed just how much things had changed. "Mom, can we invite Dad to parents' night at school next week? Ms. Johnson said we could have both parents come, even if they don't live together." Daniel looked up from his science homework, adding, "Yeah, and maybe you could help explain the genetics unit they're teaching next month. He's been reading all about it." Andrea smiled, remembering how far they'd come from those first painful days. "Of course he can come," she said. "Just text him about it." And just like that, they went back to their homework as if it was the most normal thing in the world. Because for them, it had become normal, this new version of family they'd created together. That night, after the twins were asleep, Andrea looked at a new family photo on her phone, one taken at the birthday party. In it, they were all laughing at something Sophia had said, the twins sandwiched between their parents, everyone looking genuinely happy. It wasn't the family picture she'd imagined 11 years ago, but it was beautiful in its own way. Their story had become more than just a medical case study. It was a testament to the power of truth, the strength of forgiveness, and the fact that sometimes the most beautiful families are the ones that find their way back to each other, even if the path isn't what anyone expected.